All right, everybody, welcome to part 2 of this lesson of solving inequalities. So let's go ahead and take a look at our focus for this part of the lesson, which is to write and solve inequalities using multiplication and division and to graph inequalities on a number line. And again, you should be able to answer the question, how do you solve inequalities, by going through this lesson. We reviewed previously the graphing symbols that we're going to use when solving and graphing inequalities. So let's make sure that you take a moment to jot these down if you didn't already in part 1 of this lesson, along with what an inequality looks like, how you graph it, and a word sentence that would go along with it. In our last lesson, we focused on using inverse operations of addition and subtraction in order to isolate a variable in an inequality. But in this lesson, we're going to be focusing on using inverse operations of multiplication and division. But there's a very important point that I need to make sure that all of you write down and understand before going into solving for and graphing inequalities, especially when we're using multiplication or division. Here we go. When you multiply or divide by a negative value, the inequality symbol will switch directions. So, for example, if your original inequality symbol states that Q is less than -7, by dividing by or multiplying by a negative value, it is going to switch and be facing the other way. And we're going to go through some examples so that you can visualize that as well. So here's our first example. We're asked to solve for -2w is less than -14. We're asked to graph those solutions. And the steps that we're going to take are to isolate the variable using inverse operations. We're going to simplify. We're going to ask ourselves, did that sign change? Did we multiply or divide by a negative value? Then we're going to ask ourselves, what kind of graphing dot are we going to use to graph this inequality? And then we're going to go ahead and graph those solutions. So let's go ahead and isolate the variable w. In order to do that, we need to use inverse operations by dividing both sides by -2. That simplifies the left side of our inequality to be w is less than a +7. Now, since we divided by a negative value, our graphing symbol is going to flip. So w is really greater than 7. Now, greater than is an open graphing point on our number line. So we're going to leave that open. And we're going to graph all the possibilities or the solutions of that point by graphing everything to the right of it, since that's the way that it is pointing now. It switched directions because we divided by a negative value. So make sure that you're paying very close attention to the values that you're multiplying or dividing by in order to isolate that variable. Let's go ahead and take a look at another problem where we're asked to solve w divided by 3 is greater than 3. We're asked to graph those solutions. First, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 3 in order to isolate that variable. So multiply both sides by 3. When we do that, those cancel out on the left side of our inequality, and we're left with w is greater than 9. Greater than is an open graphing point, and we're going to graph everything to the right. So everything greater than 9. So I'm going to go ahead and use my pointer tool. And there we go. We graph that point. W is greater than 9. Now we're going to go a little bit more in depth and work with a word problem. We're asked to write an inequality that describes this situation. The luncheon special at Little Jimmy's costs $4.89. The math club has $23.53 to spend. How many luncheon specials can the club buy? So let's go ahead and think. We're obviously going to need to use multiplication in order to figure out how many meals we can get. So if it costs $4.89 per meal, we need to figure out just how many meals we can buy without going over to $23.50. So our inequality symbol would be less than or equal to $23.50. It can be equal to $23.50 because that's the amount that we have allotted ourselves, but it has to be less than that. It can't go over. So there we go ahead and we wrote an inequality that describes this situation. On your own, please feel free to solve for the variable x to figure out just how many luncheon specials that math club can buy. Alright guys, we're to the end of our lesson, and you should be able to answer this question. How do you solve inequalities? If you have any questions regarding the lesson on solving inequalities using addition or subtraction or multiplication or division, don't hesitate to let us know, and don't forget to answer the questions below. Thanks everybody, have a great day.